What do I think about microdosing with GLP-1? Well, I'll tell you an interesting story. I interviewed someone about these Ozempic and GLP-1 agonists and tirzepatide and megapeptide and alaponapeptide and all the peptides out there. Her name is Dr. Tina Moore. It was a fascinating interview. And being the good little immersive journalist that I am, I actually injected with Ozempic for 2 weeks leading into the show in increasingly higher dosages to just see what the dose response to the stuff was. Starting off, it controlled appetite shockingly well, meaning like I would make myself my beautiful, glorious morning blueberry coconut water smoothie and then just kind of sit there staring at it, asking why the heck I made myself a smoothie, because I didn't really want a smoothie or anything at all for that matter in the first place. I made myself a beautiful sous vide for 3 hours, then smoked, rubbed in rosemary and thyme, beautiful bison porterhouse steak, and sat there. It took like one bite, dipped it in a little Primal Kitchen ketchup and had one bite and then pushed myself away. I actually lost 3 pounds of muscle during that experiment. And as I increased the dosages, began to experience what I suppose would be some of the more concerning side effects with higher dosages. I got nauseous. I had gut issues, couldn't stay off the toilet. So works amazingly well, but at the dosages that most doctors are now prescribing, it does result in some pretty significant gastrointestinal issues, nausea, diarrhea. I felt a few times like I was going to vomit. I had a horrible gastric reflux and constipation. And that's what a lot of users who are taking standard dosages of something like Ozempic will report. Some users have even reported experiencing pancreatitis, and that's a life-threatening, potentially, inflammation of the pancreas, involving severe abdominal pain and nausea and vomiting. And so there are other side effects of GLP-1 agonists that have been observed, primarily in animal studies, but things like thyroid tumors, cancer. And I'm not saying this to just scare people away from using GLP-1 agonists, because like I said, like at very small dosages, in my experience, I was like, holy cow, if I did have appetite control issues or if I did want to lose some weight, which I didn't, I was just doing to see what it felt like, this would be like a total secret weapon. So microdosing, though, is, I think, a fascinating concept when it comes to something like Ozempic. Microdosing, as you're no doubt aware, refers to taking less than the standard dose of anything like a medication or a psychedelic or anything like that to achieve some of the benefits while minimizing the side effects, right? You get people microdose with, and I've done this, microdose with psilocybin, right? You take a mega dose of psilocybin, let's say you take 2 or 3 or 4 or more grams, and you might be talking to fairies and running through a pastoral field in your underwear. And you take a smaller dose, like let's say 0.25 to 0.5 grams, and stuff just comes alive a little bit. Better sensory perception, music becomes more colorful, images pop out a little bit better in nature. Some people even use it as so-called hunting medicine in some tribes. And I think there's a time and a place for something like that, right? Like a subperceptual dosage. So when we look at microdosing with a pharmaceutical drug, like a GLP-1 agonist, this would involve taking a smaller than prescribed dose of that medication to achieve some of the benefits while potentially minimizing some of the concerning side effects. So you could get some of the appetite and food craving suppressing benefits of GLP-1s without experiencing the range of side effects that one would commonly experience when one is using the standard dose, which is the dose that has traditionally been used in diabetic management. And indeed, when I interviewed Dr. Tina Moore, and that interview might have come out by the time this podcast is released, and if so, I'll link to it in the show notes. She described how most doctors, in her opinion, are massively prescribing, or not overprescribing, but overdosing in terms of the volume dosage of something like Ozempic. And when you consider the fact that Ozempic comes in pre-filled injection pens with specific dosing increments, you could technically just stick with the smallest dose and not increment your way up. Or, and many people are doing this, they're talking to their physician about working with a compounding pharmacy in order to get a microdose of something like semaglutide, aka Ozempic. So with the microdose, I'm already being asked by some people who I shared about my experiment with how much I was actually using when I microdosed. So for semaglutide, the actual microdose is 0.5 to 0.125 milligrams. Okay, so this is a very, very small amount, meaning that for 50, well, let's use a little bit friendlier language here, micrograms. Okay, so I was taking 50 micrograms, and that was the microdosing amount I used that worked fantastically with no side effects. 50 micrograms meant that with a full insulin syringe, I was pulling my peptide, my semaglutide, because I was using the peptide version, back to the 3 tick mark, right? So 3/100ths of what appears on the insulin syringe, almost a barely perceptible amount if you were looking at it visually. And that's all that it took. I mean, that's how potent this stuff is. So in my case, I think it was a 5 milligram bottle that I arrived, and I reconstituted it with 3 ml of the sterile water. And so that meant that based on the rough math, and there are peptide calculators all over the place on the internet, by the way, pull it back to the 3 tick mark. And that was all that it took. And the levels that you would take for a microdose are going to vary from GLP-1 to GLP-1. Like there's another one called tirzepatide. For tirzepatide, it'd be an extra decimal point. It's actually 500 micrograms. And in a case like that, same dosage mixing ratios, you'd pull the syringe back to the 30 tick mark instead of the 3 tick mark. I'm not a doctor. I don't want any of this to be misconstrued as medical advice, but that was what I did, and those were the effects that I noted. So Dr. Tina Moore, she's actually pretty fascinating. I would visit her website. She even has a whole article about microdosing with GLP-1s, TYNA, and listen to my podcast interview with her. It was fascinating. And of course, after finishing that episode, I quit using GLP-1s again because I need to lose weight like I need another hole in the head. It's hard for me to keep weight on. Like I got to eat like 4,000 calories a day to maintain weight. I have a screaming high metabolism. I got a bunch of leftover muscle from my bodybuilding days. I walk all over the place and barely drive my car at all. I'm not a candidate for a GLP-1. However, she even got in our podcast into the idea that there are a multitude of beneficial side effects that go beyond just weight loss, things like lipid management. I believe she discussed blood pressure management, there's blood sugar management, et cetera. One other very interesting thing that I noted, by the way, anecdotally, was that I had very low blood sugar. No surprises here because I wasn't eating that much, but I didn't have a lot of the symptoms of low blood sugar, which I thought was interesting. Like normally, if my blood sugar, and I wear a continuous blood glucose monitor to track this, were at like 50 to 60, I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would just wake up hungry. But when I was using the microdose, and obviously as I went along, larger doses of Ozempic, I was sleeping all night long just fine with blood sugar between about 50 and 60. And I'm not arguing that hypoglycemia to that extent is a good thing, but I did think it was interesting that what would normally cause me a lot of issues from an energetic standpoint wasn't really causing any issues. So anyways, there you have it. And there are my brief thoughts on microdosing with GLP-1. Hit subscribe, leave a ranking, leave a review if you got a little extra time. It means way more than you might think. Thank you so much.